Noor set the director's notebook down on the chair arm, and then she pulled me into her lap, both hands at my waist, the move without preamble or hesitation or the social scaffolding that would have made it easier to survive. My hands found her shoulders. My spine made a decision about vertical without consulting me. The script pages fell from my grip to the floor, and neither of us watched them go. She looked at me from that close range, the LED work light catching the angle of her jaw, the loose strands at her temple, the precise quality of her attention, which I had been performing for without admitting it for 9 weeks. And her hands at my waist did not move for a long time, which was more specific than motion. Then her voice, even. Deliberate. The voice she uses when she has already made the decision and is telling you about it as a courtesy. "I've been directing what the scene was about," she said. "Tonight I want to direct what it was about for me. Not a request. A change of scene. If you want to hear uncensored too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe." The wrap day had the quality of an ending since 6:30 in the morning when I arrived on set, and the energy was already different. Not the performed emotion of endings, the structural fact of them. A set in its last hours of production has a specific texture. The grip crew moves differently. The lighting department breaks down equipment with a kind of focused efficiency that contains something valedictory without announcing it. The craft services table was running low by 10, and no one restocked it, because why would you? The day was nearly done, and that detail, the low coffee, the half-empty fruit tray, registered in me with a weight disproportionate to its practical significance. I had been tracking the ticking clock since morning with the attention I give a scene that is nearly complete and knows it. The kind of attention you deploy when you are aware that the last take will be the last take, and you're trying to be present for it, without the effort of being present, becoming a performance of its own. I know how to do that. 3 stage productions, 2 of them extended runs, one of them a critically received piece that made my name in a context where making your name means something specific and permanent. I know how to locate myself inside the final hour of a work. I know how to let a thing end. What I had not previously known how to do was spend 9 weeks on a closed set with a director who watched me from behind the monitor at a specific angle. I know the angle. I have been aware of it since week 2 with the precision of someone who has learned to note the light source in any room she enters, and then locate myself inside the ending of that, which is a different problem entirely. The wrap itself came at 6:47 in the evening. The last take of the last scene, a 2-hander in the living room set, my character and the secondary lead, a conversation that concluded the series' central question, was, by the technical measures available to me, excellent. I felt it. The kind of feeling that arrives in the chest and the throat simultaneously and is not pride. Specifically, it is more like recognition. That is the take. You know it when it happens. The lines were clean. The silences were placed correctly. The thing under the scripted thing was present and legible without being underlined. Noor called cut, and then she said, from beside the monitor, "That's the one," her voice level, not inflected with the emotion the crew clearly felt. I could hear it in the quality of the immediate silence, the brief, held collective breath before the applause that television crews produce at wrap, with a generosity I find genuinely moving. Noor's voice was level, and her face was still, and she set her headphones on the monitor cart and walked onto the set floor. And for a moment I watched her from my mark, because I was still standing at my mark, and I had not yet decided what to do with my hands. She shook my hand. Formal, brief, direct. 9 good weeks, she said, which, from Noor, I had come to understand, meant something in the register of rare praise. 9 good weeks, I agreed. And she nodded once, and then the first AD was there, and then the producer, and then the cascade of wrap day formalities that are their own kind of scene. I should explain about the 9 weeks. I will try to do it with some accuracy, because I am precise about craft, and I try to be precise about other things too, including the things I would prefer not to be precise about. I had done 3 stage productions before this series: stage trained, stage formed, stage in my bones. Television was a different instrument. I knew that going in, everyone tells you that. The scale is different, the physicality is different, the eye of the camera versus the eye of the room. What I had not been prepared for was a director who watched. Not supervision, not the monitoring of technical requirements. Watched with the attention of someone who was interested in something specific and intended to find it. Week 1, I marked it as professional intensity. Noor's reputation preceded her. 2 critically lauded series, several directorial awards, a body of work that demonstrated a consistent specific interest in the inner life of women on screen, not their performed inner life, the actual one, the one they do not intend to show. I had known who she was before I took the role, and I had been, in my honest moments, aware that the knowledge affected my decision. I am being precise about this. Week 2, when I first registered the angle. We were in the living room set, the same set I would stand on for 9 weeks, the same 2 chairs Noor had positioned on day 1 with a deliberateness I noted and filed. We were shooting a scene that required my character to sit in the near chair and deliver a monologue of moderate length. And I was doing it, and I was aware from the second take that Noor was watching me from the monitor at a specific angle that was not the angle of the lens. The lens was slightly left of center. She was standing to the right of the monitor, which put her slightly behind and to the side of the principal light. And from that position, I know this because I am an actress and I have been noting light sources my entire professional life. I was half lit, not in the scene's lighting design, in the ambient light of the studio floor. She was watching my face in the studio light while the camera was recording my face in the scene light. I registered this with a clarity I immediately attempted to file incorrectly. Professional assessment, director observing performance, entirely standard. I did not look at her during the take. I delivered the monologue to the correct mark on the wall, and I felt the scene, and I did not look at Noor. On the third take, in the brief pause between action and the moment my character began to speak, I was aware of exactly where she was standing, which told me something about where my attention was that I was not ready to receive. This is what I mean about week 2. By week 4, I had developed a fairly sophisticated system of not noticing. I was performing my scenes to the appropriate marks, responding to the other actors with the attention and generosity that the work required, maintaining the internal architecture of my character across the arc of the series. I was doing my job well. I was also, in the margins of the job, tracking Noor's position on the floor at all times, and could have drawn you, without looking, a diagram of her movements through any given shooting day. The system of not noticing, which I should clarify, was not a system of not seeing. It was a system of seeing with precision and then declining to interpret. I am not sure these are sufficiently different things. I am raising the question rather than answering it. Week 6. The director's notebook entered my awareness as a specific object. I had always known about it. Directors keep production notebooks. The specific notation varies. Some directors use them for technical references, shot lists, lighting setups, continuity notes. Some use them for the more ineffable material, the performance notes, the atmospheric decisions, the quality of a scene that cannot be measured in frames per second. Noor's notebook was the latter kind. I knew this because on one occasion in week 4, when we were adjusting a scene between takes, I had been close enough to the chair arm where she set it to see the page facing up, and it had been dense with writing. Not shot list notation, prose, the small, precise handwriting of someone thinking on the page. And I had looked away immediately, which was the correct thing to do and which I thought about for the rest of that afternoon. In week 6, she made a note in it immediately after a specific take of mine. A take that I had felt, again, in the chest and throat register, again with that quality of recognition. And then she closed it and looked up, and our eyes met across the floor for approximately 1 second before she said, to the first AD, "Let's set for coverage." The 1 second landed in my chest in a location I was not prepared for. By the end of week 6, I had been not noticing for 42 days, and I was, in the privacy of my own internal life, aware that the not noticing was accumulating in the same way that interest accumulates, the compound kind. Week 9, the last week. If the rap day had the quality of an ending since morning, the final week had the quality of a last act. Everything was doing double duty. The scenes we were shooting were the final scenes of the series, the conclusions of arcs, the resolutions of questions, the particular kind of closure that good television earns over the course of a run. I was performing those endings, and underneath them, parallel to them, there was another set of endings I was not performing because they were not in the script, but that the 9 weeks had been quietly building toward. I am being precise about this. I said I would be. The last day of shooting was a Tuesday. The call time was 6:30. I was in hair and makeup by 7, in costume by 8:15, on the floor by 8:45. I had been to hair and makeup, I had had the day's work conversation with the department head, I had checked the sides for the day were the last pages of the last scene which I had carried in my hand since 8:50 because I found them easier to hold than to put down. And I had walked onto the set floor, and Noor was already there, standing in the center of the living room set, looking at the 2 chairs. She had positioned those chairs on day 1. I had watched her do it, not delegating herself, moving the near chair 3 inches and then 2 inches, and then standing back and looking at the geometry they created, angled toward each other, and then deciding. The angle was specific. It was the angle of 2 people who are in conversation and have not yet said the thing they're going to say. She had looked at the angle for a long moment before saying, to the set decorator, "There," and it had stayed that way for 9 weeks. Every shooting day, whatever was required by the day's scenes, the chairs returned to that configuration between setups. It was a production decision. It was also something I had been performing toward for 9 weeks without examining too closely what I was performing toward. She did not see me when I arrived on the floor that morning, or she saw me and did not indicate it, which with Noor is a different thing. She has a way of receiving information without confirming its receipt that I had spent 9 weeks learning to read. I stood at the edge of the set floor for a moment and watched her looking at the chairs, and there was something in her stillness that morning that was different from the professional stillness I had been observing since week 1. It was more absolute. The kind of stillness that is not the absence of movement, but the active suppression of it, like the last several seconds of a held breath. Then she turned and saw me, and the stillness became something else, more organized, more deliberate. And she said, "Morning," in the voice she uses for all professional interactions, which is level and efficient and contains nothing superfluous. And I said, "Morning," and we went to work. The day proceeded with the architecture of final days. The final setup, the living room scene, both chairs at their angle, me in the near one, my scene partner in the far, was scheduled for after lunch. We shot the scene 6 times. On the 4th take, I felt it again, the chest and throat recognition. I was delivering the last lines of the last scene of the series, the lines that resolved the central question, and I felt the scene land, and in the same moment, I was aware of Noor's position at the monitor with a clarity that had nothing to do with the scene I was filming and everything to do with the scene the 9 weeks had been building, the one without a script, the one I had been performing for without a call sheet. She called cut. Long beat of silence. Then, "Once more." Her voice had a quality I could not identify. Different from the voice she used on takes 1 through 3, different from take 5, which had been a technical issue with a light. The once more voice had a quality of wanting something specific, and not for the first time I was aware that the want was legible in her voice in a way she might not have intended. Take 6 was the last take. I know it was the last take not because she said it was, but because of the way the silence after cut held itself, the way the crew registered it, and the specific quality of her voice when she said, from beside the monitor, "That's the one. That's the one." She meant the take. Of course she meant the take. I know what directors mean when they say that. Wrap came at 6:47, as I said. The formalities proceeded, the handshake, the producer, the AD, the crew, the cascade. The afternoon light was long and golden through the high studio windows, the kind of light that arrives in the last hour of a late afternoon and does something to the air of a place that makes it feel briefly infinite. I moved through the wrap formalities with the competence I bring to scenes I have prepared for, and at approximately 7:30, the first AD said, kindly, "You can go any time." And I said, "Thank you." And I found that I did not go. I had a reason. The script pages, the last pages, the ones I had been carrying since morning, were still in my hand. I needed to return them to the script supervisor. This was my reason, and I accepted it without examination. The script supervisor had left at 7:15. I discovered this when I went to find her. The pages remained in my hand. At 8 o'clock, the grip crew was substantially complete with their breakdown. The lighting department was mostly out. The set remained standing, the living room set, the practical furniture, the 2 chairs at Noor's angle, because the strike had been scheduled for the next morning. The LED work light on a stand had been set up by the last gaffer's assistant, directional and warm. And in its light, the set looked different from how it had looked during any day of production. The shoot lights were designed to construct a specific world. This single work light was not constructing anything. It was simply illuminating what was there. I had been standing at the edge of the set with the script pages in my hand for approximately 20 minutes when I registered, without turning around, that Noor was also still on the set floor. I have said that I developed a system of tracking her position without seeming to. What I mean precisely is this. By week 6, I had become aware of her presence, the way you become aware of a change in atmospheric pressure. Before the relevant information registers consciously in the body, in the specific alert quality of the back of the neck and the shoulders and the muscle group that runs along the left side of the jaw, where she was most often to my left during monitoring. When she entered a room, I knew it. I knew it earlier than any ordinary social awareness would explain. She was at the back of the set, near the standing equipment. I could hear her footsteps. Not loud, never loud, she moved through the world with a specificity that meant contact between her and any surface was deliberate. And then they stopped, and I understood she was looking at the set. I turned. She was standing at the far edge of the living room set, looking at the 2 chairs. Still in her utility jacket, dark, fitted, worn for 9 weeks, with the same quality of practical decision that characterized all of her clothing. And in the single warm LED light, she looked like she was watching something that was about to be taken away from her. I did not plan to think that. I am reporting what I observed. She looked up and saw me looking at her, and for a moment the set was very quiet. The crew entirely gone by now, the equipment humming its ambient hum, the chairs at their angle. "You're still here," she said, not inflected with surprise, informational. "Script pages," I said. The supervisor left. "I know," Noor said. I saw her leave. A pause that landed somewhere in the specific register between the end of a sentence and the beginning of a scene. "The chairs are still at your angle," I said. I do not know why I said that. It was accurate, which is my best defense of it. Noor looked at the chairs and then back at me. "They were always at my angle," she said. I stood with the script pages in my hand in the LED work light, and the set was quiet. And the 9 weeks were present in the room in a way they had been for some weeks but had not previously been quite this undeniable. "Yes," I said. "I know." The director's notebook was on the chair arm. I had been aware of it as a specific presence since week 6, and tonight its presence on the chair arm felt less like a production object and more like the last witness to the 9 weeks, the one that contained the record, the accumulated notation that I had been not asking about for weeks. Noor walked toward the set, and she walked with the same deliberateness she brought to every movement, the movement of someone who does not arrive anywhere accidentally, and she stopped at the near chair and looked at the notebook. I was standing approximately 4 meters away at the edge of the set. The work light was between us, directional, catching the chair arm and the notebook in the angle of Noor's profile. She reached out and picked up the notebook. I watched her hand, which was long-fingered and competent, the hand of someone who has spent 9 weeks making decisions with it, and held it for a moment. She did not open it. Then she set it back down on the chair arm, and the gesture held something I had not seen from her before in 9 weeks of close observation. It was the gesture of someone deciding whether a tool is still necessary, and having decided it was not. The heat went through my sternum in a single specific pulse, low and involuntary, and I noted it with the internal voice that has been noting things for 9 weeks and declining to interpret them. "Tell me what you know about this notebook," she said. She had not moved from the chair arm. Her hand rested near it, not touching, close. "Only what I can see from here," I said. "Which is that it's full. 9 weeks, she said. 9 weeks, I agreed. She looked at me from across the set in the single warm light, and her expression was the expression she uses when she is looking at a scene she has already decided to keep. Not assessing, receiving. I had been learning to distinguish those 2 qualities for 9 weeks, and I was reasonably confident in my reading. "You've been curious about it," she said. Not a question. "Not professionally," I said. The silence that followed that admission lasted long enough that I had time to register what I had admitted, and to note that my heart rate had done something involuntary in the saying of it, and to note that I did not attempt to walk it back. Noor looked at the notebook, then at me. Then she moved, not toward the notebook, toward the door, away, but stopped, changed direction, came back to the chair arm, and this time she did not pick the notebook up. She stood beside the near chair, one hand at her jacket pocket, the other near the notebook, and something in her expression had a quality I recognized from the takes I had watched from the monitor during week 4. The quality of a surface holding something back. The quality of a surface not entirely succeeding. "The shot I held longest," she said, to me, not to the room, directly to me, which meant she had decided to say it. "Wasn't in the script." She said it in the same level, direct voice she uses for all declarative statements. And yet the thing it did to the air of the set was specific and irreversible. I felt it in the back of my throat and in the space behind my sternum and in the palms of my hands where I was holding the script pages. I looked at her across the 4 meters and the single warm light. She had taken her hand out of her jacket pocket. Her hands were at her sides, which for Noor, who almost always has at least one hand in a pocket or on a notebook or around a coffee mug, who is, in short, a person who keeps her hands occupied, was a visible decision. I know, I said. You've known since? Week 2, I said. The set was quiet. The ambient hum of the work light's transformer filled the space that the statement left. And I was aware of my own breathing, and of Noor's, and of the specific quality of the air between us which had been building voltage for approximately 42 days and was now demonstrating what 42 days of compound accumulation produces. She took a step toward me, not toward the notebook, not toward the chairs, toward me, direct, deliberate, the step of someone who has made a decision and is honoring it. Then another step. Then she was at close range, 2 meters less, and her hands were still at her sides, and her expression had a quality I had not seen from her in 9 weeks, which was that it was not entirely organized. You held it and didn't call cut, I said. My voice came out level, which I consider one of the more credible performances of the 9 weeks given what my sternum was doing. No, she said. I didn't call cut. She reached out and took the script pages from my hands. Both hands, slowly. The gesture completing the transfer with the same clean deliberateness she brought to every decision on the floor, every blocking choice, every held shot. Her fingers closed over the pages and mine opened, and for the duration of the exchange, brief, professional, the handoff of a production document, the outside edges of her fingers were at my fingertips, cooler than I expected. The temperature registered on my skin with the specificity that had nothing to do with the transfer of paper. Then she stepped back, folded the pages once in half, and set them on the near chair, behind her, which meant the script pages were no longer in my hands and I no longer had anything to hold. I was aware of this with the anatomical clarity of someone standing in a room after the furniture has been removed. My hands were empty. The pages I had been carrying since 8:50 that morning, the last pages of the last scene, were behind her on the chair, and I was standing in the work light with nothing between me and the 9 weeks except the specific quality of Noor's attention, which had always been a physical event and was currently registering at close range as something I did not have a professional category for. Tell me what you were playing in that last scene, she said. I considered my options. They included deflection, which I am competent at, and a version of professional precision that would have named the scripted interior correctly without touching the thing underneath. Both were available to me. Both would have been accurate in the technical sense. The scene is about loss, I said. The character is processing the end of something she expected to last. That's what's scripted. Noor waited. And underneath that, I said. I stopped. My sternum was doing a thing that I had been noting since week 6, in which I had been filing under the incorrect category for that entire period. Underneath that, I said again, I was playing someone who has been performing the appropriate response to something she doesn't want to end, performing it correctly, performing it for someone who would know the difference. I looked at her. She was very still. The kind of still I knew by now meant she was paying the most attention. And you were there, I said. So, she said. So I was playing it for you, I said. I've been playing it for you since week 4. The scripted scenes for the camera and the thing underneath them for you, and you've been watching both, and you've been... I stopped. You've been making choices about what to keep. She let the silence hold for a beat, one beat, the length of a cut she was deciding about, and then she said, I cut those takes. My chest did something specific and involuntary. I kept the one where you stopped performing it, she said. My voice, when I tried to produce it, did not arrive on the first attempt. I waited a moment. My hands, which I had been holding with the careful stillness of someone who is not going to let their hands do anything they'll need to account for, had done something without my instruction. They had closed, fingers curling, not into fists, just the natural closing of hands that are trying to hold on to something that isn't there. I noted this with the internal voice. That was take 6, I said. Yes, she said. I felt it in that take, I said. I know, she said. It was on your face. I let the set hold us for a moment. The single warm LED work light, the chairs at their angle, the director's notebook on the chair arm that she had picked up and put back down, and the script pages now behind her on the near chair, and Noor 2 meters away with her hands at her sides and her expression not entirely organized, which was the most specific intimacy I had seen from her in 9 weeks, and which was landing on my skin at approximately every surface simultaneously. She moved to sit in the near chair. Not the far one, not the other configuration. The near chair, the one she had specifically angled on day 1, and from the chair she looked at me standing in the work light with a quality of attention that I was no longer pretending to myself was professional, and then she reached up and took my wrist, not my hand. My wrist, her fingers wrapping around it with a firmness that was not forceful, but was absolutely specific, not uncertain, not tentative, the grip of someone who has decided and is acting on the decision. And she drew me toward her, and the geometry of the near chair and the angle she had set on day 1 resolved itself into an entirely specific configuration. Me in her lap, facing her, both her hands moving from my wrist to my waist, settling there, the warmth of her palms spreading through the blouse fabric in 2 specific locations that I was aware of at the anatomical level of nerve endings responding to temperature and pressure. My hands found her shoulders. My spine made its decision. The script pages had fallen to the floor again, or perhaps she had shifted and they had gone from the chair, and neither of us watched them go, because we were looking at each other from a distance that was not the distance of 9 weeks, and was not any distance I had a professional name for. Her hands at my waist did not move. This was the specific quality of it. Not the grip, the stillness. Both palms at my waist, holding without pressing, present without moving, and the warmth accumulating between her hands and the fabric of the blouse and my skin through the fabric with the specific quality of something building rather than something completed. She was holding the shot. The knowledge of it moved through me from the place her hands were to the back of my neck and settled there, alert and warm. I looked at her face in the LED work light, the angle of her jaw, the loose strands at her temple that had been coming down since the afternoon. The dark eyes that were not assessing, were receiving. Were doing the thing she had been doing from beside the monitor since week 2, but at a range where I could not pretend it was professional. "I've been directing what the scene was about," she said. Her voice was even, the most controlled version of her voice. "Tonight I want to direct what it was about for me." She did not move her hands. She did not look away. "Not a request," I said. "No," she said. There was a quality to the air in the set, the work light's warmth on the set's surfaces, the ambient hum of the transformer, the chairs at their angle and the notebook on the arm and the script pages on the floor. That was the quality of something that had been building for a very long time and had arrived somewhere. "Tell me what it was about for you," I said. My voice was doing its best. I was doing my best. Her hands at my waist shifted, not moving from their position, settling deeper into it, the pressure incrementally more present, the warmth more specific. And she said, 9 weeks of watching, you know the difference between what is scripted and what is real, and deciding every single day which one I was watching. The hum of the transformer shifted, a subtle cycle in frequency, the room's version of a held breath-changing shape. And I was aware of the warm light on my right shoulder, directional and specific in a way the shoot lights never were, and the texture of my blouse under her hands and the warmth accumulating between that fabric and my skin. "Both," I said. "You were watching both." "Yes," she said. "And tonight?" "Tonight," she said, "the call sheet ends here." Her hands at my waist were still. The stillness of them was the most specific thing I had ever experienced at close range from another person. Not passive, actively held, requiring something from her. Visible in the slight tension along her forearms and the line of her shoulders, the cost of the stillness, the cost of 9 weeks of held shots, the cost of watching both and not naming either. She was looking at me from that range with an expression I had not seen on her face before, which was the expression of a woman who has been holding something still for a very long time and is not, for the first time, deciding whether to continue. My hands on her shoulders were aware of the warmth of her through the jacket fabric, the slight rise and fall of her breathing, which was not as steady as her voice, the specific quality of the muscle under my palms that was not relaxed. She was holding herself very still, which I understood now as the same thing her hands at my waist were doing, the same quality of active restraint, the same visible cost. She was not relaxed. She was choosing. I looked at her face in the warm work light, and I was aware of everything. The set around us, the 9 weeks in the room, the director's notebook on the chair arm, the specific geometry she had set on day one that had resolved itself into this. And I was aware of the weight of her hands at my waist and the warmth of them and the fact that they had not moved. And I understood with the clarity that arrives in moments when the body has been more honest than the mind that the stillness was not absence. The stillness was the most specific presence, the most specific choice. I breathed. You kept the take where I stopped performing, I said. Yes, she said. So stop directing me, I said, which was the driest thing I had said in 9 weeks of a project with a very high dry remark average, and show me what the scene was about. Something in her expression shifted, a fractional movement at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile, but was the precursor to one, the ghost of it. And then her hands at my waist did move, both of them, sliding fractionally forward until the heels of her palms were at my hip bones, and she said, "One more take," then quieter. "No character." I was looking down at her from the configuration we had arrived in, her in the near chair and me in her lap, with the LED work light catching the angle of her jaw and her hair loose at the temples, and her dark eyes at a distance that was not the distance of any previous moment in 9 weeks. And she said my name, not the character's name, not the actress being directed register. My name quietly, in the lowest range of her voice, Ida. It landed in my chest in the specific location where everything from 9 weeks had been accumulating, and the sound of it there had a quality that I had no professional category for and was not going to attempt to label. Her arm, the one braced on the chair arm beside me, changed from braced to holding, the muscle shift visible in the forearm, not forceful, present, the shift from resistance to choice. Her breath, which had been contained and level since the beginning of the conversation, was at my collarbone. I was aware of it as a thermal event, warm and specific against the fabric of the sheer ivory bralette where the second button of my blouse had been open since the morning's first setup, and it was not steady. The quality of her breathing at that range, the audible texture of it, the warmth arriving against my collarbone in intervals that were not as even as her voice had been. She was looking up at me from that angle in the work light, her face at the level of my collarbone, and the expression on her face was not organized in the way her expression was always organized. It was the expression underneath the organized one, and I was looking at it from a distance where I could see it clearly. She said, "Give me one more take." Then, no character. The set was completely still. The ambient hum had shifted, the transformer cycling in a frequency change that altered the quality of the silence. And then it stopped entirely, the hum cutting off, and the silence that followed was absolute. No ambient sound, no equipment hum. The specific quality of absence that a television production set achieves at the end of its last night. Total, particular, a silence that is the sound of something having been completely made and now being allowed to be what it is. I held her face in both hands. Her jaw was cool at my palms initially. The set had the ambient temperature of a room that has been air-conditioned for production and is now simply a room, and then warming immediately. The heat of her skin arriving at my palms with the specificity of close contact that has been deferred for a very long time. Her hair was loose at her temples under my fingertips, the strands finer than I had imagined, and I was aware of the exact texture of them and of the warmth beneath them and of the slight intake of breath she produced when I tilted her face up. I tilted her face up. She allowed it. That word, allowed, is the right word, the specific word, because it was a choice. The choice of someone who has been choosing everything with precision for 9 weeks and is choosing this with the same deliberateness. Her chin came up. Her eyes, which had been at the level of my collarbone, were now at the level of mine, and the distance between my face and hers was the distance of a shot held 1 beat too long, which was the distance she had been holding since week 2, and which I now understood was not a technical decision. "That's the take," I said. My voice was low. Lower than it had been. The voice that arrives when the performed register drops away and what remains is what was underneath it. "Don't cut," I said. She looked at me from that distance with her face in my hands and her breath at my collarbone, and her hands at my hips and her arm that had shifted from bracing to holding. And her expression was not composed. For the first time in 9 weeks, Noor's expression was not composed. Not collapsed, not broken, not anything as dramatic as loss of control. She was too precise for that, too specifically herself. But the organization was gone from it, the managed surface, the quality of a face deciding what to show. It was simply her face, and she was looking at me from the distance of a held shot with it, And the quality of the silence in the set was the quality of something having arrived at its final frame. Her thumb moved. One thumb at my hip. The pad of it tracing a single slow, deliberate arc from the top of my hip bone inward, across the thin fabric of the blouse. The movement so specific and unhurried that it registered in every direction from that point simultaneously. Up my spine and across my collarbone and through the warm space between us. The movement of a thumb that knows what it is doing and has decided to do it. She exhaled. The breath arrived at my collarbone warm and controlled and not steady, and I felt the warmth of it spread across the front of the sheer ivory bralette and into the skin beneath. And in the silence of the set where the transformer had cycled off and left them with nothing between them except the single warm LED work light and 9 weeks and the geometry she had set on day 1, the warmth of that exhale was the most specific intimacy I had survived. She said, "I'm not cutting." Her face was tilted up. My hands were at her jaw. The distance between us was the distance of the shot and the distance of the decision, and it was the same distance. She was looking at me with the organized surface gone, with the quality of someone who has been choosing everything and is choosing this with the full precision of herself. And the warmth of her palms at my hips spread slowly through the blouse fabric in 2 specific locations, and her breathing was audible in the silence, and mine was not steadier. I closed the distance. I will tell you only what can be told without lying. Her mouth was warm. The first contact, lips, hers, the specific softness of them, a temperature I had not predicted and cannot now unknow, was deliberate and unhurried and had the quality of a decision that has been made and is being honored in full. Her hands at my hips drew me fractionally closer, not abruptly, the incremental motion of someone who is not rushing what has been a long time coming. The scent of her at that range, cedar and cold linen, which is what I had named it in week 3 and confirmed in every proximity since, was present and specific and arrived in the back of my throat with the warmth of the LED light and the warmth of her hands and the particular quality of the 9 weeks made immediate. She kissed me with the same precision she brought to every decision on the floor, specific, deliberate, asking nothing rhetorical. The quality of a director who knows exactly what she wants to see and is watching for it. I gave her what was real, not performed, what she had kept the take for. We remained in the chairs at Noor's angle for a long time. I do not have an accurate accounting of how long. Time on a set after wrap, in a room that has gone quiet and dark except for a single work light, has a quality that does not translate to clock time. What I know is that at some point her utility jacket was on the chair behind her and the black silk camisole was visible, and the top button of my blouse had joined the second in being open, and the sheer ivory bralette was visible in a way that the blouse could no longer be said to be minimizing, and the LED work light had done what that kind of light does to 2 women who are not performing for anything. We talked. I want to be clear about this because the talking was itself a specific thing, not the professional conversation of 9 weeks, not the directed collaboration, but the conversation of 2 people who have arrived somewhere they were both navigating toward and can now speak plainly. She told me about the shots she had held. Not all of them. She did not need to. I knew most of them. I had been living in my half of them for weeks. But the specific ones. The one in week 3 where she had held on my face, in the silence after the scene's dialogue ended, the shot that ran 14 seconds after cut was called before she registered she had not called it. The one in week 6 that she had put in the notebook. What she had put in the notebook about it. What was the notation? I asked. She said, "The real thing is available in this face. Note, it is not the characters." I sat with that for a moment. The LED light was warm on the set surfaces, and on us, and on the director's notebook on the chair arm. "That's the week I started not interpreting," I said. "I know," she said. "I saw it happen. I didn't want you to stop." "Why didn't you say something?" She looked at me with the expression I was still learning, the organized surface gone, what remained underneath it, and said, "I had a project to finish." Which was the most specific and accurate and characteristic thing she could possibly have said, and which produced in my chest a warmth that had nothing to do with the LED work light and everything to do with the 9 weeks and the deliberateness of the woman in front of me, who had held every shot with a precision that was inseparable from her care, and had not compromised either the work or the thing underneath it, because she understood that they were, in this case, the same thing. We were in the production chairs at Noor's angle, the angle of 2 people in conversation who have not yet said the thing, except we had said the thing, and the angle remained the same, which meant she had known even on day one what configuration would be true. At approximately 1 in the morning, when she reached over and took my hand from the chair arm. Not my wrist this time, my hand. Her fingers closed over the backs of mine with a specificity that was different from the wrist. More certain, more final, the grip of someone who is not making a decision, but confirming one already made. And she held it in both of hers and opened the director's notebook with one hand, the other still holding mine. She found the last page with writing on it. She held it open toward me. The LED work light was sufficient to read by. The writing was the small, precise handwriting I had seen on the open page in week 4, and on this page there was one line, and it was the last entry in 9 weeks of notation. And I read it. I read it twice. Then I looked up at her. She was watching me read it with the same quality she brought to watching me in the monitor. Receiving, not assessing. And her hand in mine was warm, and the set was quiet, and the chairs were at the angle she had set on day 1. I did not say anything about the line. She did not ask me to. What it said existed in the room with us, between us, part of the ambient silence that had replaced the Transformers' hum, and speaking about it directly would have been the wrong kind of scene. We both understood this. We had spent 9 weeks learning each other's understanding of what a scene required. I closed my fingers around hers. She closed the notebook. We sat in the chairs at Noor's angle for a while longer in the single warm LED work light, not talking, holding the final frame. I found the script pages in my bag the next morning. I do not remember picking them up. I remember the set, and I remember the light, and I remember the notebook, and I remember the line, and I remember at some point making my way out of the studio into a night that had turned early morning cool. And I remember the car, and I remember my apartment. I do not have a specific accounting of the script page's journey from the floor of the set to the interior pocket of my bag. But they were there. The folded pages, the last pages of the last scene, the ones she had taken from my hands and folded once in half and set on the chair, were in the interior pocket of my bag, and I did not unfold them immediately. I set the bag on the kitchen counter and stood in my kitchen in the morning light and was aware of them in the interior pocket, the way I had been aware of Noor's position on the set floor for 9 weeks. Before the relevant information registered consciously in the body, I unfolded them at the kitchen table with coffee. The script pages were standard pages, slightly worn at the edges from being carried since morning of the previous day, folded in half once in the center. The text was the text I knew. The stage directions were the stage directions I had performed 6 times across the shooting day, and the dialogue was the dialogue I had delivered, and the character notes were the character notes I had internalized until they were no longer notes. And in the margin, on the last page, in the small, precise handwriting I had seen on the open notebook in week 4, a single notation. I sat with it for a long time. Then I took my phone from the table and typed a message and looked at it for a moment before sending it. The message said, "The margin note was not there during production." The response came in the time it takes a person who is already holding their phone to type a reply. "No," it said. "It wasn't." And then, after a brief pause that I felt at the back of my neck and across the tops of my shoulders in the specific alert quality of skin that has been made aware of a particular person, "It was for after." I set the phone on the kitchen table. The morning light was coming through the windows at the angle that it comes at that hour in a city, and my coffee was getting cold, and the script pages were in my hands, and the notation was in the margin, and the line was what it was. And I was sitting in my kitchen with 9 weeks newly arrived in the ordinary morning with a specific quality of permanence that I was not going to label further. I did not need to label it further. I had the notebook entry. I had the margin note. I had 9 weeks of a woman holding the shot 1 beat longer than the scene required every single time and keeping the take where I stopped performing and setting the chairs at an angle on day 1 that she had known would be true. I had the warmth of cedar and cold linen and the weight of her hands at my waist and the specific precision of a thumb at my hip and her breath at my collarbone and her name for me in the lowest range of her voice. I folded the script pages back once along the crease she had made. I put them back in the interior pocket of my bag. I left them there.